Okay. It's like deep breaths, deep breaths. I got ready just so you don't have to stare at me hideous this whole video. But I'm going to talk about fertility. I had talked about it on my Insta stories, so I wanted to make a YouTube for you guys. And I talked about it on social media when I was going through it. That was about 4 years ago, and it was just my personal account. I would post things that I was doing and when I was doing them, and when I was sad, I would post, and when I was happy, I would post. And let me start by saying that because I'm sharing my story doesn't mean it's going to be your story. And there were so many times when I heard people tell me how they got pregnant or when they got pregnant, and I thought, I don't want that to happen to me, or, oh, I really wish that would happen to me. And it just doesn't work like that. My story, just from telling you, is not going to make you have the same outcome or a different outcome. But I believe that if you want to get pregnant enough, be a mom enough, there's always a way to make that happen. And that Heavenly Father wants that for each of us. And we can figure it out, whether it's adoption, whether it's keep trying fertility, whether it's whatever it is. So I'm going to tell you my story. After we were married for about 2.5 years, we started trying to have kids, and I got pregnant really fast with my first baby. Really, really fast. And then I went in for my first ultrasound at 10 weeks, and I had found out that my baby had died at 7.5 weeks. I remember feeling devastated. Truly devastated. And I remember him telling me that 1 in 4 women will have a miscarriage, and yet my mom hadn't had a miscarriage. No one I knew had had a miscarriage, so it seemed really foreign to me that that would be happening to my body. But I did. I had a miscarriage, and I went in for a D&C the next day. They put you under, and they kind of just like scrape out your pregnancy. And I woke up still loopy, and I remember just crying kind of hysterically, saying, I want my baby back. And I remember saying, I don't care if it's not alive, I want it back. I just felt really empty, really, really empty. And granted, I had no idea the fertility problems I'd face in the future. So to get pregnant in a month or 2 of trying is kind of awesome. It's the best thing ever. So I, with my limited knowledge, was mourning super, super hard. And oftentimes people would ask me to compare if losing a baby was harder than having a baby or not being able to have a baby in the future. And they were equally as hard because I could only understand what I could understand while I was going through it. Does that make sense? It's like you can't have someone else's knowledge. I can't even have my own future self's knowledge. I only had the knowledge I had right then. And to me, I felt like, what if I never get pregnant? What if I have millions of miscarriages? It just left me with a huge question mark. Yes, 1 in 4 people is normal, but what if I have 10? Like, I had no idea. Devastated, and it was like a really dark few days after that. My husband had to stay home from work with me, and we just kind of mourned the loss together. And as far as miscarriages go, I think I mourned that loss more than him. And I think as a woman, you do, because you kind of plan that whole baby's life from the minute you get pregnant, especially with your first. So I still know that my baby would have been born on November 1st was the due date. And I had a D&C on April 1st, and I found out I was miscarrying on March 31st. And still every time of year that's almost coming up, that comes up, I tend to have like a weird day, like an off day where I feel sad. And it's not about the actual baby probably at this point, just that marks a moment in my life where I was really sad. And I almost feel like my body has a memory of that. And so sometimes I'll be going about my day and I won't even be thinking about it, and I'll be sad, and then I'll remember it's April 1st or it's March 31st. And I'm like, oh, that's so weird. Fast forward, I had to stop trying to get pregnant for about a month after my D&C, and then I started trying again, my husband and I, and we tracked our ovulation just because I'm a control freak like that, so I want to know when we could get pregnant. And once again, we got pregnant 2 months after we started trying, and I was terrified to lose my baby, and sort of starting off on a miscarriage probably turned me into the anxious mom and pregnant person that I am. Especially given my natural nature to be anxious. I'm an anxious person. I have an anxious mom, and I kind of think worst case scenario a lot. And so once I had a worst case scenario, I definitely was prone to thinking I was going to have that again. So with a lot of faith and prayer, and a lot of help from my husband and comfort from my husband, I hoped again that this pregnancy would stay, and I got really lucky, and I stayed pregnant with my daughter, and I carried her to term, had her 10 days early. And then I felt really fulfilled. I felt whole again. The minute I got pregnant, I remember saying to someone, I just feel whole. I feel like I'm put back together after I lost that baby the first time. And having a baby instantly healed me from losing a baby, if that makes sense. It made it all better, sort of right away. When she was about 2.5, we started talking about having another one. And we started trying. We stopped preventing. So we stopped preventing about 2.5 years old. And we didn't think about it. But I thought about it sort of every time I would start my period. I would think, that's interesting. Normally, I've gotten pregnant twice now, and I've gotten pregnant in 2 months. So it kind of played on my mind, but it was like summer or something. And so we were distracted and we were busy and just figured it would happen. And so I just waited. And every month that would go by, I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I'm probably gonna get pregnant next month because it's already been 4 months. It's already been 5 months. It's already been 6 months. It's already been 7 months. So I'm gonna get pregnant for sure next month. And by the time we got to about 10 months, I remember thinking, I don't think this is normal. And so I called my OB and asked what I should do. And he had me come in at a year. He said, when you've been trying for a year, you can come in and you can start some hormones and some fertility stuff. So I said, okay. And fertility stuff, just Clomid is what he was saying. I start some Clomid. And like I said, I can't have the perspective that I was going to gain in the next year or so, but Clomid made me crazy, like certifiably insane. And I am borderline crazy at all times, which may be being too generous, but I think I'm borderline because I understand, like, I am going to be crazy, or I'm crazy because of this, and this is what's bugging me. This was like a crazy out of left field, a crazy that like whacked you upside the head, like insane. So I took that for 3 months and I tracked my ovulation and I still didn't get pregnant. So I was like, this is not worth it. Like, I was insane. At one point I had a dark, like, nervous breakdown, maybe I would even call it. And I sobbed hysterically. And I sort of like leaned into feeling really sorry for myself and kind of let what I can really only describe as like this darkness in, that I was feeling like it would never happen. And why me and all these kinds of things. And I had this huge panic attack. I'm never going to get a baby and my kid is going to be alone forever with no siblings. And I then was anxious about everything. I was anxious about burglars. I was anxious about cancer. I was anxious about all these things. My go-to anxiety is health. So when I couldn't get pregnant, I remember thinking something's wrong with me. Like, I have cancer, or I have something they haven't found. And I would just get something has to be like really, really wrong in order for this not to be working, because it's worked 2 times before, even though one of them was a miscarriage. So after that wore off, he said I needed to go to fertility doctor, a specialist. I think I gave it a few months in between. And then we decided we would go to a specialist. So we went to Dr. Craig, and I will give you all his information at the bottom of these pages. And I felt really hopeful again, like really, really hopeful. And he was like, you're young, you're 27 and you have a kid, and they tested my hormone levels and they were a little bit off. And they tested my husband's sperm and he was all-star. And so although I was happy for him, it was a mild punch in my gut because it was for sure me. But I didn't have PCOS. I didn't have anything like really, really wrong with me. I maybe just had a little bit of hormones off, and I had my thyroid. They wanted it a little bit in a different place, which we've talked about that on my Insta stories. Now it's still happening. So they fixed those things for me. And then we decided to start with IUIs because I was so young and whatever. So you start taking the shots, injections into your stomach. And correct me if I'm wrong on all the terms, but I switched to something called Femara, which he explained to me that Clomid was like the 1970s version of fertility medicine. It was outdated, it wasn't thorough, it wasn't precise, and that Femara was like a better version of it. And yet, I know women who've gotten pregnant on Clomid and who Femara didn't work for them. So I was hopeful since Clomid hadn't worked for me, and so I did Femara. And then I would take my injections and shoot myself in my stomach. You had to grab your skin and give yourself a shot. And my husband, he hates needles, like faints, like dead on the floor, fainting at the sight of needles. So he was no help to me. And so I had to shoot myself in the stomach, hyping myself up like, okay, I'm going to do it. I can do this. I wanted to have a baby. I can do this. I'm going to shoot myself with this needle. I've got it. Jumping up and down and grabbing my skin and then finally just like gently stabbed, but probably more aggressive than I should because I was like hyped up into my stomach and give myself my first dosage. And I remember bruising and bleeding a little and it's crazy. I just remember thinking, I've never known anyone with infertility. And so, holy crap, this is insane to try to get pregnant. Like, how do people even get pregnant at 16? How do people have accidental babies? Get real. That is not even possible. So I gave myself the injections and I felt those ovaries plump up. And so by the time I would give myself an HCG shot to trigger my ovulation, they would be good. They'd be big and plump and juicy eggs or whatever. So I would come in and my husband would have to come in with me. So I would give his semen sample, specimen. They cleaned it. They would clean his spermies. They would get the sharpest shooters and the straightest swimmers and the one with no big heads and too small of tails. And they would put them in a little tube for us and they would save them for me, for my ovulation, to stick up my hoo-ha and impregnate me, hopefully. They would show your tube. Are you Bennett Jade, and Bennett Ty? And Ty would go, no, actually, like, my last name's James. Do you have, like, a LeBron James semen sample on there? And the women would just, he's so funny. He wants a black baby. And so he was insane. So he would make that joke every time. And then they'd put it in. And then you leave about 5 minutes after that and hope that that big, plump, juicy egg and that little straight swimmer could find each other. And his sperm count, by the way, was like off the charts. Like, it was so good. They would always tell him every time he came in. And my husband would leave that office like they just told him it was a foot bigger. And I'm like, your semen count doesn't have anything to do with the size. You know what I'm saying? But couldn't contain the pure masculinity he felt by finding out he had millions of swimmers extra. Something we could just give away. I would go home and I would try to rest. It didn't work. It wouldn't work. I would come in, I'd get my blood draw, and they would call me, and I would hear their voice at the other end of the line, and they would sound sad, and they would always have to tell me it didn't work. I remember dreading that day. Dreading it. There were a few times where I started my period before I went down there, like a day early, and it was almost a relief because I couldn't handle the sound of their voice, and they were the nicest girls, but it was heartbreaking every single time. And so after it didn't work for 2 or 3 times, you'd reevaluate with a doctor, and he said, what if we try scraping your uterus? Which, like I mentioned before, it's almost like a procedure like a D&C, only you didn't have a pregnancy in there. And what it's supposed to do is fluff the lining of your uterus. And so it was supposed to just create damage that would create healing, that would make a nice fluffy place for your embryo to stick to once it was fertilized. And they thought maybe they were fertilizing and then they just weren't sticking to my uterus. So we tried that and I felt really good about that. I had to every month when it would fail, there would be a moment where I would go, I can't do this anymore. I can't do it. I don't want to do it. This hurts. It's awful. I can't get my hopes up again. But in order to put yourself through the shots and the medicine, every single time I had to get my hope back up again. I had to believe that 100% it could happen. And I would every time. It was like a blessing to be able to just feel like I really knew it was going to happen. And the whole time while I was experiencing this infertility, I knew in my soul that I had more kids. I knew it. I knew on a spiritual level that Heavenly Father had more kids for me. In my patriarchal blessing, which is something we get in the LDS faith, I had some words spoken in there about that I would have children born into my marriage. And I knew that. Children. I knew that it was plural, and I knew that I would have more kids. And so I just kept thinking that I got to do all I can. I'll do all I can with modern medicine, with my faith, with all the things I have to try to make this happen for us. So after he mentioned scraping my uterus, I remembered that I'd had a miscarriage and then had a D&C and then got pregnant with Peyton and stayed pregnant with her. So I thought, maybe that same kind of procedure will really work for me. So this one you had to be put under for. I was really hopeful. They put me under, I had this procedure done, and then I had to let it heal, and then we could try another 2 or 3 rounds. We tried about 5 IUIs total. And that was kind of the limit, 4 or 5 usually, until you switch to IVF or something else. And really just IVF. There is nothing else. Like, that's what it is. Then you move to the $20,000. And so each procedure of IUI cost us about $3,000 to $5,000 depending on the medicines. The medicines aren't cheap. They're usually not covered by insurance. And we had to come up with that. And so I had this procedure done and I was excited. And the next transfer, I had 9 big embryos. And I remember sitting in the office. I'd go to these appointments alone because I had to work and he'd have to come to the next one for the sample. So I was sitting there with this woman and she was like, oh, 9, that's just too many. She's like, I don't want to be on the news that you had quadruplets or whatever. So I was like, okay. I'm like, well, I haven't had any babies. So the odds of me having quadruplets, like, aren't those 0%? And she's like, no, you're 27. You're so young. You could have 4 babies. And I'm like, okay, I still want to do it. And she's like, well, I have to talk to the doctor. We might have to cancel you at this session. And I was just like, please don't cancel me. So I was super, super afraid. And so she went and talked to the doctor and he said that I could go ahead. He's kind of cool and he's, I don't know, more chill. Dr. Craig. You didn't meet with him a lot. You met with his girls a lot and I fell in love with all of them. This one particular nurse talking to me now, though, she wasn't my favorite. She was kind of like blunt and annoying. And so I sat in her office after, as she said, he says we can go ahead and, stimulate your ovulation and go ahead with an IUI. So I said, great. And she said, but just so you know, if you have 4 babies, like, don't sue us or don't do this or don't talk about us on the news. And I looked at her and I said, but there's still a chance I could have no babies. And she's like, well, there's always a chance. But, that's a lot of eggs. So I went home just like so excited thinking, oh yeah, this is like my best chance I've had so far. I have the most eggs. I have my uterus scraped out. And there were a few times in the middle of the night where I woke up just like sweating, like, I cannot have 4 babies. I'm going to have 4 babies. And I was like, knew I wasn't going to, but what if I had 4 babies? Like, that's not even, I don't want that. I don't even want twins, really. I just wanted 1 baby at a time. I waited to find out if I was pregnant. And I went into the office that day and had my blood draw as usual. So you'd go in at like 9 a.m. Then they said they'd call you at like 2 p.m. And so you would just be waiting all day. It was the worst day. I got nothing done and I just couldn't deal. It was the worst day. And so I would wait for the phone call. And then when I got the phone call that I was not pregnant, I remember feeling like I had lost 4 times as much hope and chance as I ever could have had. And that I felt utterly discouraged. I felt devastated. I didn't understand why I had a healthy 4-year-old at this time and why I couldn't have another baby. Like, why wouldn't she get a sibling? Like, they were growing farther and farther apart in age and I just couldn't understand. But she was going to turn 5 in February and it was coming around the corner and I just was panicked. What do I do with myself if I can't have a baby? How does she not have a baby? She's going to go to kindergarten and she's never going to get to be at home with a sibling. It's going to be like 2 separate families if I ever even freaking get one at this point. And I was devastated, ultimately devastated. I had 1 more round and he said we could do 1 more round. So do this last round, and it was November at this point. I'd been trying since the summer. So it had been about 6 months, 7 months of trying this. And it was my last chance and I could feel that pressure. And I got the transfer, like I said, and then I started my period. I remember a day or 2 before I was supposed to go get my blood draw. But they would always say, well, spotting can be normal. Come in, let's just check your numbers. So they checked my numbers and they were so hopeful every time and they were so nice to me. And it didn't work. And I wasn't pregnant again. I mean, I'm sure you know if you've done it, but you pee on like 1,000,000 sticks, like 1,000,000 in a matter of 3 years. And every single time they said no was like a dagger And so it was no, again, something I should have been comfortable and familiar with, but it wasn't. And I was done. And so I don't have money for IVF at that time, and something about IVF just didn't feel right. And so I decided to just, it was December the next month, my husband and I decided to just take the month off and to enjoy Christmas and to make our daughter that we had's Christmas the best ever. And I feel like I should tell you that I never took her for granted. I never wanted another baby in replacement of her. In fact, I almost feel like it was worse to have her, which I know is unfair if you don't have any and you want one, because they're all awful. But I really would watch my friends have babies, and they were having their seconds and their thirds, and I would go see them and their sisters. Would come to the hospital to meet them, and I just wanted that for my daughter so bad. I'm a big sister, and I wanted her to be a big sister, and I just felt like it was unbearable. And she was great. She wasn't sad, and she never really talked about it, but I would see things and I would just want that for her. And I remember, hilariously enough, Frozen came out. And it's that whole relationship between sisters. And I had friends with girls that were close together, and I felt just really sad for my kid. She didn't know what that relationship was like. So I was ultimately defeated, but I didn't want to ruin Christmas. Ugh, fertility. It was years ago, and it's still devastating. And so Christmas we took off. And my husband really wanted me to take it off. He said, mentally, as much as you could, don't stress, don't think, just let's do Christmas. Everyone would tell you, you just need to relax and then you'll get pregnant. You're just too worried about it. And it's like, okay, you cannot be worried about it. It's not your life. I can't not be worried about it. It's my whole life. It's what I think of every day. So I had a 3rd bedroom at our house that we were living at the time, and I had been saving it for a nursery, and I decided to turn it into a playroom for my kid. And so I put black and white stripes up, and I made all these things. Gave in. I just did everything. I had been restricting myself from almost some things, not on purpose, because I knew you could work out and get pregnant, but I wanted to take yoga instead of spin classes. And I just changed some things up to make myself feel like it wasn't my fault. I wasn't getting pregnant. And Christmas came and went, and it was around the 20th of December that I was like, I feel like I'm supposed to start my period. But I was not naive enough to hope. I was the opposite of naive. I was jaded. I was traumatized. I wouldn't even dare to consider that I was pregnant. I wouldn't dare. So I just kept waiting for my period to come. And as it got closer to the new year, I was like, wait, I went back and I actually looked at when my last period was, and I was like, this is very strange. And so one Sunday we were at my parents' for dinner, and I was like, babe, can you run to the store and get me a pregnancy test? And he's like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, I know, but it's bothering me and I just need to take one. So well, let's just take it. And my family was like, yeah, you should open it here. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. So I left my parents' house. We drove home, and I told my husband to get my daughter for bed. And as you know, you shouldn't pee on a pregnancy test at night. It's like your urine's not as potent, and so it shouldn't tell you you're pregnant. And I peed on this test for the 9,475 millionth time. And I sat it on my counter, and I waited a few minutes, and dang it, I'm sorry. I looked at this pregnancy test, and there was a plus sign. And I screamed. I'm sure scared my daughter so bad. I screamed so loud because I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. I was pregnant after 3 years of trying. And after I gave up and turned it over to the Savior and said, I can't do this anymore, I got pregnant. And I was irritated because that's the worst story ever. People would tell you stuff like that when you're pregnant, like, when I stopped trying. And I'm like, well, that's not comforting to me. I'm trying right now. But sure enough, I stopped trying and I got pregnant all on her own, the old-fashioned way. And I had just finished at my doctor, so I went there and I got a blood draw. And I waited for the phone call, and I kept thinking it was going to go away, like that I was going to miscarry, or that phone call would be bad again. And when I picked up the phone. All of the girls who had helped me the whole time that I was there were on the line. And they said, "You're pregnant and your numbers look great." And I could hardly believe that it was true, and I was so happy. And they put me on progesterone and kept me on it for my first 15 weeks, and I stayed pregnant, and I was nervous, but I stayed pregnant. And just like that, all of the pain and the waiting was over. And I was so happy. I loved that pregnancy. I loved being pregnant with my son. Found out it was a boy, which was everything that we had wanted. And we were just so lucky. And I felt really lucky. And I felt really blessed. And I felt really taken care of by my Heavenly Father. And it was full of so much joy. And so his whole life has been like that. When he was born, I let lots of people in the room because I felt like it was kind of everyone's baby. We were all so excited, and it had taken so long, and so everyone came in, and the feeling in the room when I gave birth to my son was overwhelmingly happy, like in pure just bliss. And he was born, and I know that family from the other side of the veil from heaven were in that room with us, and they had been comforting me along the way to let me know that more children were coming. And I was happy. And I love him so much, and I call him my Miracle Miles because he healed me. He healed all the pain and all the suffering I had been going through as a mom for the last 3.5 years. And I felt whole, and I felt fixed. I just felt fixed. It felt worth it. Everything felt worth it. And I wouldn't trade that experience for the world. And I mean that. It was awful, awful. Wanting something so righteous, I felt so worth wanting, and yet I wasn't getting it. And yet I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about my religion and my beliefs and my Savior in heaven and my Heavenly Father. And I learned a lot about my marriage. I learned to not take my kid for granted that I had. And then when I got my Miracle Miles, I felt like I would never take anything for granted ever again, which is not true. You can't hold on to that feeling forever. And when my daughter came in to meet my son for the first time was the happiest moment of my life. And I had pictures of her meeting him, and I would just cry the whole time, happy tears of our family being reunited and being together again. And I just couldn't believe that it was happening. We decided to try, like not try, to not prevent. And I ended up getting pregnant right away with my daughter, my third. And I was so excited again because it was another positive pregnancy test. It was the first one I'd taken. And I was scared because they were going to be 15 months apart. And everyone would tell me your third is your hardest and 15 months apart is terrible. And it's going to be awful. It's going to be terrible. You're going to hate it. And I'm like, no, not me. Not me, because I was infertile and I know how lucky I am to have 3 kids. And yet, here I am. I don't know if you can hear her screaming in the background. I'm going to go get her. She's supposed to be falling asleep. I have 3 kids and I have 2 kids under 2. And sometimes having them is really, really hard. Being a mom is really hard, but I feel really lucky that I know how hard it is to not have it. And so I try not to take it for granted. I get frustrated, I lose my temper, and I get mad. But I love them, and I know that they are mine, and I'm lucky to have them. And as we think about having a 4th baby, I get all these feelings back, and maybe that's why I chose now to talk about it. Because I get afraid a little bit again to start trying to want another child. Because with my third, I didn't have to want her. She just came. And I get afraid. I get afraid to want, to get afraid about what my body's doing inside, the things I don't understand or know. And I get nervous. But I know that I've lived through it once. And if I have to live through it again, I can. And I know that I have another baby that I want to have, and I feel like that belongs to our family. And so when the time is right, we'll start trying, and we'll just do everything we can, and we'll see how that one's supposed to turn out. But I wanted to share my story with you and let you know that it's really hard to not be able to get pregnant, and it's really hard to have lots of little kids. I don't really think life was made to be easy or to be not challenging. I think the challenge is what makes everything worth it. Marriage is challenging because it's worth it, because you love that person, and you get to be with them forever. Being a mom is challenging and worth it because you get these human beings that you get to raise and to nurture and to love. That you don't give up hope, that you know that fighting for it can work, and it does work, and that if you use what I feel is a little bit of science with a lot of faith, sometimes those things work out. And when the science doesn't work out, you have faith that whatever spirit is supposed to be in your family, whether it's someone else's that they're giving up or whether it's one for you just a lot longer down the road than you thought, that you'll get it. If you want to be a mom, you will be a mom. I'm grateful that I have had this infertility experience and that I could share it with all of you. Oh my gosh. Let's stick to talking about soda and like insane things, because I was looking good, now I'm looking busted. That's my fertility story, guys. Now I gotta go get one of my cute little demons right now out of bed because she won't take a nap. But I'm so glad we had this conversation. Now let's like me Jade, let's take a nap. Let's go see if she'll take a nap. I love you. Mwah. Thank you for following. I hope you subscribe because I want to talk about kind of crazy stuff like this, and I want to talk about really funny stuff. So I'm going to make fun stuff. We'll keep it lighthearted sometimes, but you got to keep all the options open. So fertility and a little emo, it's just going to happen every now and then. So love you. Subscribe to my page. Let's be best friends forever. Love you. Bye.